Do you know who the world's biggest oil producer is right now? It may surprise you, but it is not Saudi Arabia or Russia, who have been vying for the title for years. It is the United States, which has been steadily increasing its production of this precious resource for more than a decade. According to the latest figures, the US produces more than 13% of the world's supply. This means that the Americans are not only self-sufficient in energy, but can also export oil to other countries. Never before has so much oil been produced as in the United States this September. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the country reached an average production of 13.24 million barrels of crude oil per day, breaking the world record. This is an increase of 1.7% on the previous month and more than 10% on last year. U.S. oil producers have no intention of slowing down and have announced that they will continue to increase the productivity of their fields. How have they managed this? The main factor has been the development of technology to extract oil from oil shale, which is rich in this resource. This has allowed the U.S. to exploit its vast natural resources and reduce its dependence on imports from the Middle East or Russia. Oil is not only the fuel for our cars, but also the basis for many other products and industries. Oil is used to make oils and lubricants, asphalt, plastics, and many other substances. Oil is also a factor in politics and international relations. Many countries rich in this resource use it as a means of pressure or blackmail on their trading or geopolitical partners. An example of this was last year when Russia cut off gas supplies to Europe via Ukraine, causing an energy crisis. Oil is therefore a key resource for modern civilization, with both positive and negative aspects. It is worth being aware of its importance and the consequences of its use. How did U.S. shale oil save the world? In 2008, the world was on the brink of disaster. U.S. oil production fell to a record low of 5 million barrels a day, while world oil prices hit a record $150 a barrel. Central banks raised interest rates to curb inflation, leading to housing crises in the U.S. and the Eurozone. Countries such as Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain struggled with excessive debt and faced bankruptcy. Fortunately for the USA, a way was found to increase oil production from unconventional sources such as shale. Thanks to new technologies such as hydraulic fracturing and vertical drilling, U.S. oil producers have been able to increase production to more than 13 million barrels a day. This has driven down the price of oil on world markets to around $60 a barrel, bringing relief to economies and consumers around the world. What would have happened if oil production had not increased so much and had cost, say, $300 a barrel? This question may seem abstract and far-fetched, but it has huge implications for our world and our lives. I will try to outline the possible implications of such a scenario, both at a global and local level. At a global level, an increase in the price of oil would have serious consequences for the geopolitical and economic balance. Oil exporting countries such as Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran would gain huge revenues and influence. They would be able to increase their spending on armaments, investment, and development aid, and put more pressure on oil importing countries such as the United States, China, and the European Union. These countries would have to accelerate their search for alternative energy sources, such as renewables, nuclear energy, or hydrogen, and reduce their dependence on oil through energy conservation and improved energy efficiency. At a local level, an increase in the price of oil would also have a dramatic impact on our daily lives. The cost of travel, transport, and food would rise significantly, affecting our household budgets and quality of life. People would have to change their habits and lifestyles to adapt to the new situation. For example, people would have to live closer to jobs, schools, and shops to reduce commuting costs. They could also use public transport, cycle, or walk instead of driving. In addition, people could buy fewer things and food, choosing local and seasonal products to avoid high transport cost. High oil prices have had disastrous consequences for many countries and regions of the world. Not only have they increased production and transport costs, but they have also exacerbated poverty and social inequalities. High oil prices have been one of the causes of famine, migration, conflict, and civil unrest, such as the Arab Spring. High oil prices have threatened international stability and security and hampered economic and social development. Low oil prices therefore benefit the world as a whole by counteracting these negative developments. Low oil prices reduce the cost of living and production, improve the availability of food and energy, reduce tensions and conflicts, and stimulate economic growth. Shale oil has helped the U.S. withdraw from the Middle East in recent years. The U.S. has achieved an incredible feat. With record oil production from U.S. shale fields in 2021, total U.S. production was exceed 10 million barrels per day for the first time since the 1970s. This is a huge success story with far-reaching implications for U.S. foreign policy and national security. One of the most important changes is the reduction of U.S. dependence on oil imports from the Middle East, a region that has been unstable and plagued by conflict for decades. For many years, the U.S. has been forced to maintain a strong military and diplomatic presence in the region to secure access to the strategic resource and protect its allies. This has cost the U.S. enormous sums of money and human lives. It is estimated that involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan has cost the U.S. more than $6 trillion and more than 7,000 dead soldiers. This does not include civilian casualties, injuries, refugees, and other negative effects of these wars. There is no doubt that these have been the most expensive and longest conflicts in U.S. history. But now the situation has changed. With the surplus of shale oil, the U.S. can concentrate its forces mainly on Asia and its rivalry with China, and on Europe and its rivalry with Russia. These two regions pose a greater challenge and threat to U.S. interests than the Middle East. China is the world's second-largest economy and a rising military power challenging U.S. dominance in the Pacific. Russia, on the other hand, is a nuclear power that seeks to undermine the international order and U.S. influence in Eastern Europe. The U.S. does not intend to leave the Middle East altogether, but wants to keep its involvement to a minimum. It does not want to get involved in more conflicts that do not serve its national interests. They also want to encourage their allies, such as Saudi Arabia and Israel, to become more self-reliant and responsible for the security of the region. The U.S. wants to be a partner, not a guardian of order in the Middle East. Shale oil has given the U.S. the opportunity to save the dollar's dominance as the world's reserve currency. This allows the U.S. to finance its budget and trade deficits with ease. It can also impose sanctions on countries that violate international law or threaten world peace. Shale oil has also given the U.S. an advantage over other countries that are more dependent on oil imports or exports. Has given the U.S. greater flexibility and independence in strategic decision-making. Low oil prices are hampering Russia's war effort by reducing its budget revenues and increasing the risk of recession. Russia is heavily dependent on oil and gas exports, which account for more than 40% of its budget revenues. Without them, the Russian budget would be in constant and large deficit. In Russia, for example, a fall in oil prices of $1 per barrel translates into a reduction in budget revenues of around $2 billion. The Russian government is preparing a budget plan for the next few years that assumes a 25% drop in revenues from oil and gas exports by 2025. As a result of the decline in such important sources of revenue, the government is considering reintroducing a fiscal rule that requires these revenues to be sufficiently high relative to the market price of Urals oil. It is estimated that the Kremlin will have to cut spending by 10–15% in the coming years to keep the budget deficit in check. Low oil prices therefore threaten to cause a recession in Russia and limit its ability to pursue an aggressive foreign policy in its main war effort in Ukraine. Russia needs high energy commodity prices to shore up its fiscal position and fend off economic sanctions imposed by the US and the EU. Cheaper oil is also good news for regions still dependent on the commodity, such as Europe and Japan. With lower fuel costs, these countries can save on oil imports and increase their production and exports. This in turn means higher living standards for their citizens and better economic health. Cheaper oil is also an opportunity to increase investment in renewable energy, which can reduce dependence on oil in the future. Cheaper oil is therefore not just a win-win for consumers, but also for entire regions. American oil has saved the world from a deep recession and provided energy stability. At the same time, it has created new jobs and income for U.S. workers and taxpayers. Thank you for watching the video. Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. See you next video.